Hello and welcome to the Capitol Report on NTD Television. I'm Steve Lance. The White House today is doubling down on efforts to get people vaccinated against monkeypox, particularly homosexual men who have been most affected thus far. This as the CDC is preparing to expand its powers, including new mandates on collecting data. NTD's Melina Wisecup reports.
An additional 1.8 million doses of the monkeypox vaccine will soon be available. Starting Thursday, states and local officials can request more vaccines to distribute at large LGBT events in the coming weeks and months. The White House's monkeypox coordinator describes the initiative.
HHS is launching a pilot program that will provide up to 50,000 doses from the national stockpile to be made available for Pride and other events that will have high attendance of gay and bisexual men.
Intimate contact is the highest risk form of the spread, but the White House is now warning Americans that it's not the only way the disease spreads. They say other populations could become more vulnerable to monkeypox, including college students, sports teams, and children at daycare centers. More than 13,500 cases have now been found in the U.S. The director of the CDC says distributing the vaccines can be complicated.
And then they will necessarily receive dose 2 at their local jurisdiction. And we anticipate that. We've seen that before when we've done mass vaccination, for example, with COVID. So we are prepared to collect the immunization data.
The CDC's latest goal is to make data collection mandatory. Right now, that's voluntary. The agency plans to ask Congress to expand its powers, one of those powers being to require states to submit health data to the government agency. This is one of the many ways that the agency is planning to reshape the way it operates after they say the government failed at handling the COVID pandemic properly. The agency is also creating an executive council that will report directly to CDC Director Walensky, and the CDC is now closely monitoring the reemergence of polio. Reporting in Washington, D.C., Melina Wisecup, NTD News.
To assess the CDC's handling of the pandemic, family physician Kat Lindley joins us. Dr. Kat Lindley, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Doctor, the CDC director has recently come out and announced that the CDC's handling of the pandemic was less than satisfactory, saying, quote, for 75 years, CDC and public health have been preparing for COVID-19, and in our big moment, our performance did not reliably meet expectations. As a physician, what is your assessment?
I would say that's an understatement, right? Because for the past 2.5, almost 3 years, most of their policies actually have failed the general public.
And if you could just give us your thoughts as to where they failed the most, if you will.
Well, for example, there was just an article about 6 feet apart, how that number was kind of made up. There was no specific reason for 6 feet. Also, the masks. There's really there's no scientific data to actually prove that masks work. And they're still failing because they did not actually state anything regarding masks. And now we're going to have children, I believe in Philadelphia schools, I read yesterday, are going to have to wear masks. So I think to keep on allowing these policies to continue, and you can just even go by the recent change in CDC guidelines. There's no change between vaccinated and unvaccinated anymore. So why did they push these vaccines on everyone, and some people have lost their jobs for it? I would say that most of the American public actually is very disappointed with the policies that came out of CDC, and this idea that they will now regroup and see what's going on.
You touched on a lot of interesting points there. Based on what we know now, according to CDC guidelines, like you mentioned, about the virus, vaccines, natural immunity, etc. Does it make sense that the United States military still has a vaccine mandate in place for soldiers?
It doesn't make sense to have vaccine mandates for anyone. It doesn't make sense that we approved these vaccines in children just recently. It doesn't make sense that we're going to have new vaccines for different strains that won't even have a trial. So none of these policies have made much sense from the beginning, and the fact that they keep on going with them truly doesn't make sense.
Is there a silent majority in the medical world that, after watching the way things have evolved, as you mentioned, from misleading on cloth masks, vaccine mandates over vaccines that don't stop the spread, the demonization of ivermectin, that there is some healthy pushback over all of this, that the CDC is now having what seems to be this unusual watershed moment?
I think the biggest failure of our response to this epidemic is actually not allowing physicians to be physicians and make these decisions directly with our patients. I care deeply about the health of my patients. I would never give them something that I don't think it's going to work or that would harm them. And to put barriers into trying to treat patients from the beginning at home so they don't have to go to the hospital was a huge failure, in my opinion. And to tell you an idea, when I lost confidence in CDC was really early on, because when the whole thing started and New York was in such a mess and, Northeast states had a lot of cases, we started with wearing N95 masks with the visors, and then they ran out of those, so that it was KN95s. They ran out of those surgical masks. At one point, they said to wear a bandana. And also for us in the hospitals, because they didn't have enough supplies, they would say, you can sterilize your N95 mask and things like that. All of that was nonsense. And just by some of those directives, you can tell that, honestly, they were just making it up as they were going. And the fact that now 2.5 years into it, we're still asking some children in some school districts and different states to wear a mask, knowing that there is actually a huge toll on children's mental health. I really urge CDC and the leaders at CDC to truly look at the cost of this pandemic on people's lives and then see what they've done wrong. And there's nothing wrong with admitting that we made mistakes. That's a first step. But now they truly need to go back and look at everything and reverse their course, because their course is damaging Americans going forward.
Dr. Kat Lindley, thank you.
Thanks.
Today, a hearing in Palm Beach related to the raid at former President Trump's home. The judge has indicated that he will unseal part of the affidavit that was used to search the home of the former president.
Today at this court, just 4 miles from former President Trump's Mar-a-Lago home, a judge said he will likely release part of a critical document, a document that the DOJ used to convince this court that the former president's home should be searched. At today's hearing, the DOJ argued that the probable cause affidavit should not be unsealed because it would interfere with its criminal investigation into the former president. The DOJ wants everything to be kept secret. On the other side, we have mainly media organizations pressing for more information. They agree that there are reasons not to make everything public, but press the judge to unveil as much information as possible and just hide or redact anything sensitive.
This is not a right of media access, it is a right of public access, and the core of that right is the ability to monitor the functioning of the government.
They said given the political nature of this case, people need to know that the investigation is legitimate.
We are entitled to monitor the affairs of our government at all levels, and that is the interest in this essence that we were asserting today.
The judge agreed that it was in the public interest to give people as much information as they can have, but asked, is it not also in the public interest to ensure the investigation proceeds untainted? Magistrate Judge Bruce Reinhardt was the one who actually signed off on the search warrant for last week's raid. He's now giving the DOJ 1 week to make their case for keeping each part of the affidavit private. After that, he'll weigh the requests. Paul Graney, NTD News.
Iowa Senator Chuck Grassley says information from whistleblowers shows a political infection within the FBI. Yesterday, Grassley sent his third letter to the FBI Director, Christopher Wray, demanding information about alleged bias among high-ranking officials. The letter said that the FBI approved an investigation into Trump's campaign, but simultaneously shut down an investigation related to Hunter Biden. Grassley gave a specific example of an FBI special agent that posted a disparaging tweet about former President Trump. Yet that same agent was involved in investigations of both Trump and Hunter Biden, according to the senator. Grassley also said that the FBI has not addressed any of his concerns. Today, former Trump Organization CFO Allen Weisselberg pled guilty to tax evasion charges. Weisselberg was charged for failing to pay taxes for 15 years on $1.7 million worth of compensation. Prosecutors said that the Trump Organization gave Weisselberg rent for a Manhattan apartment, lease payments for 2 Mercedes-Benz vehicles, and tuition for family members. The compensation went untaxed, and now Weisselberg will face 5 months in jail. He also has to pay back the taxes and fees that he now owes. He may be released after 100 days of good behavior. Weisselberg's charge for unpaid taxes is the only criminal case resulting from the ongoing probe into the Trump Organization's business practices. Weisselberg may be asked to testify against the Trump Organization in October during the Manhattan prosecutors' probe into the company. Today in Florida, 20 people were charged and arrested for voter fraud. Other cases are still being investigated. Governor DeSantis made the announcement earlier today, noting that this is only one class of voters who broke the law.
Now, this is only one class of voters that we know have violated the law. There are investigations ongoing into people that have voted in 2 different jurisdictions, and I imagine you are going to see prosecutions on that. We also have folks who are voting who are illegal aliens that are not citizens of the United States, and as we know in Florida's Constitution, the only people eligible to vote are U.S. citizens.
DeSantis says all records related to the 2020 election are being preserved as their investigation continues. The state's primary elections are coming up on Tuesday, and a top priority for the state is to ensure that no ballot harvesting happens. DeSantis has signed some of the most stringent voting laws in the nation, and the governor says his office is ready to enforce them as primaries and midterms unfold. Student debt forgiveness is another way of saying taxpayer-funded tuition. This idea has been a hot topic of debate on Capitol Hill. And this week, President Biden took a major step in this direction by wiping out nearly $4 billion of debt for over 2,000 students who were defrauded by ITT Technical Institute. Some say this is a stepping stone to the socialist experiment of universal taxpayer-funded college. North Carolina Congressman Greg Murphy is against this idea, and we had a chance to speak with him earlier. Congressman Greg Murphy, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Steve. Appreciate you inviting me.
Congressman, the Education Department is forgiving loans of students who attended a university called ITT Tech. It was a for-profit college that closed in 2016. Now, we don't blame the students for this, but it does raise questions about the administration's loan forgiveness initiatives. What is your take on this?
Well, Steve, it goes back to the old, and again, I commiserate with the students themselves and buying loans that now they really didn't get anything from. But it goes back really to the great adage, caveat emptor, know what you're buying when you buy it. And while there is always a risk in any purchase whatsoever, what the Biden administration is teaching, and it's teaching youth, it's teaching the country for that matter, is everybody is a victim. And if you're a victim, then the government will help you out. And sadly enough, life is full of hard knocks. I don't think that we should now be paying for educational benefits, which these students received, and they could transfer some credits, I would imagine, on the backs of people who, 1, never went to school, or 2, never benefited from anything like this. And so it's just sad. You can't sit there and tell every student, especially every young kid, that life is easy and everything, if there's a mistake made, that it will be forgiven and there are not repercussions to actions. They signed on the dotted line. They put their name on the dotted line. And I think this is one of the reasons where federal money and stuff that has flowed so easily from our federal government should be stopped, because there is no risk in this that the person themselves take, except all of a sudden now, especially now, if everything is going to be forgiven. So I think it's a very, very dangerous precedent that the Biden administration is taking.
Now, you had written to the Secretary of Education last year about the administration's loan forgiveness program. What is your biggest concern, and what kind of response did you receive from them?
Well, we didn't really get a response, sadly enough. And my biggest concern is, What are we teaching our youth? That you're not responsible for the debts that you take out? What happens when they graduate from college and they sign on their name on a dotted line for a mortgage? And all of a sudden they're not making something, they're not making enough money, or they buy too much house or something, that somebody's going to come in and rescue them. There's a thing called personal responsibility that unfortunately this administration seems to be not understanding, that it's something, this is what the nation was built on, personal responsibility. And just forgiving loans or making things easy for people where the government comes and stepped in really is not a pathway to individual success.
Congressman, you also introduced a bill to pressure university endowments to divest from dangerous Chinese entities. You said it was a threat to U.S. national security. Could you tell us about this bill?
Yeah, and so Steve, I was on the board of trustees of my alma mater, Davidson College, back in the middle part of the decade. And during that time, there was a great push for the university to divest out of fossil fuels. And so many of our investments were in mutual funds where we would just have a sliver back and forth. And we went through discussions of how hard it was going to be, but we had the moral obligation to divest out of these terrible entities. Well, now we find out that so many of our institutions, especially those who have billions and billions in their endowments, are investing in a nation, in a country that is murdering its own people, that is our enemy, truly trying to undermine the United States, undermine the democracy that we treasure so dearly. And so there's literally no reason that we should be funding our enemy. We did it long enough when Biden came in and took away the ability for the United States to pump its own fossil fuels, and we paid for Russia's war of aggression. We should not be in our nations and our universities and colleges funding our greatest enemy, and that is China. And sadly enough, a couple people came back, and to their credit, they said, yes, we don't have many investments, but we'll divest. But sadly enough, some of the bigger name institutions said, well, it's not illegal, and so we're not going to have to do it. So we will be forcing them to do it at some point.
Congressman Greg Murphy, thank you.
Thank you, Steve. God bless. Have a great day.
You too. Thank you for watching the Capitol Report. If you want to see our full broadcast, check us out at epochtv.com.